Hi there. So I'm Laura Zelenko. I am a senior executive editor here at Bloomberg, and I'm very happy to say that this video is a bit dated. We've now reached 26% female representation on Bloomberg TV, and we're heading to 30% by year end, and then we're going to keep pushing beyond that. We have so far trained more than 180 women in 10 global cities who have appeared on Bloomberg TV more than 500 times, and even more on other media. And just yesterday, we launched a new cohort for new voices of Black executives in the US, both men and women. So today I'm excited to announce that we will be joining up with Bloomberg Green to ensure that we amplify the voices of underrepresented experts in the climate change and ESG space. 2 slots for each of our remaining cohorts this year will be reserved for experts in this field, and that includes Washington, D.C., Mumbai, Dubai, Singapore, Sydney, as well as our new cohort for Black executives in the US. And we will be extending that into next year and beyond as we keep growing this program. Now, there's no better way to promote this New Voices program than to speak to some of the participants and wonder, how were they not on our radar before? Well, they are very much on our radar now. So please welcome Melanie Nakagawa, who is the Director of Climate Strategy at Princeville Capital and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Transformation at the US State Department, as well as Marcelia Freeman, the Senior Vice President in Capital Development for ESG at EIG Partners. Thank you both for joining. And let me start with you, Melanie. Why don't you tell us about what you do?
Hi, great. Thank you so much, Laura. It's wonderful to be here and great to be part of the New Voices program. I'm the Director of Climate Strategy at Princeville Capital. We are a global growth stage technology-focused investment firm. We invest out of 2 funds. The first is Princeville Global. It is an internet software-focused fund, and then Princeville Climate Technology, which is focused on investing into climate-positive technology solutions. It's actually a really exciting time to be with Princeville Climate Technology. We closed that fund end of last year, so we're in the early stages of capital deployment and looking at incredible opportunities, incredible companies across the 6 core sectors that we're focused on. Those sectors are screened for both mitigation and adaptation opportunities. We were really keen when we established the fund to take a more holistic approach to addressing the climate challenge and looking at climate solutions. So we're looking at just not the mitigation ones, but also proactively screening into our pipeline those that address adaptation. So 6 core sectors that we are focused on are advanced mobility, industrial efficiency, precision agriculture, resilient health, smart cities, and smart grids. And these are all technologies and sectors that are being driven by really the exciting mega trends in technology that are happening today. This is AI, machine learning, data analytics, all of which is coming together to provide a nice tailwind of technology to those sectors. And then, of course, sitting in Washington, D.C., the policy component as well. There's incredible policy tailwinds to each of those sectors that we're investing behind. And so we're really excited to be thinking about opportunities there. And as a global firm with offices in Hong Kong, San Francisco, and Amsterdam, we really want to take that global approach to looking at all these different types of climate positive opportunities. So thanks again.
And Marcelia, why don't you let us give us a description of what you do at work?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. So I work at EIG Global Energy Partners. We are a 38-year-old firm that is a private investor kind of anywhere in the world, anywhere in the capital stack, and across the energy value chain. So from upstream through renewables. As you can imagine, ESG is incredibly important in a business like that. I sit in the capital development team, really managing relationships with investors, and raising capital. And then my secondary job is sitting on the ESG committee. So this is something that is near and dear to my heart. And as I kind of wrap up, I'll say your last speaker, Rihanna Gunright, was amazing. And she did an incredibly great job of kind of talking about how climate change isn't about just the E, and how we can really incorporate it into all 3 pillars of ESG. So thank you.
Go back to you. And, as we expanded New Voices into Washington, I was a little bit concerned that we would have trouble finding folks in the financial industry because we don't provide this media training to politicians, to lobbyists, to people in government-sponsored agencies. But it seems that the financial industry is growing there, and that you find that it's a good place for you to do the kind of work that you're doing. Can you just explain some of the evolution of both the energy space as well as the finance space in DC right now?
Sure, I'll take that. It's actually, I was thrilled when I heard that they're launching in DC because it's actually the right time. 2020 is a pivotal moment. In just the last few years alone, you're seeing a groundswell of action from policymakers to address climate change, but not just from a very specific, narrow regulatory perspective, but you have financial regulators that are looking at the importance of climate change and how they can think about that perspective. You also have the financial community that's now under pressure, both from client demand, looking at ESG opportunities and the need for impact and sustainability, but you're also looking at it from the perspective of climate risk. We've already had in this year alone, $10 billion plus disasters in just the first half of 2020. So climate risk is not only a physical risk, it's also a capital risk. And that's becoming much more apparent to a lot of the financial community around the world, and particularly in the United States. And so between the policymakers that are here that are looking at this, the financial houses that are seeing the physical risk as well as the financial risk, and then also all the opportunities for technology that's scaling today. We've been through a pretty crazy few months in the markets today, but I think as BlackRock earlier made an announcement that their sustainable ESG indices have outperformed the rest of the market by over 90%. So, or 90% of those indices have outperformed. So it's actually, it just goes to show that sustainable investing is it's a less volatile opportunity, and one that's actually, from a perspective of Principal Capital, going to be quite a profitable one as well.
And that's interesting. Marcelia, I mean, I think I'm right to say that ESG has been, there's been a lot of women in the ESG space over the years, but it's not been a very mainstream topic. In fact, it had been in the past much rarer for us to bring folks talking about ESG on Bloomberg TV and into our reporting. That's changing now significantly, and as Melanie said, it's very much in the focus of the news right now. So what does that mean for women in that space and for representation going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I'll start with the first part of your statement around, the urgency around ESG, especially within the finance business or the private equity business. I think we've certainly seen the emergence of ESG, over the last decade or so, to be incredibly important to investors. Part of that is a demand push from the underlying constituencies at investors, whether they are pension fund beneficiaries, university endowments, students, or the beneficiaries of foundations. You're really starting to see a groundswell of demand for sustainable investing. You're also, seeing an interest in just the policy perspective of climate change and anything related to ESG. But I think most importantly, you're seeing an emergence of an investable opportunity set within the sustainable space. You're seeing real return generating opportunities that are not for the double bottom line or triple bottom line investors, but for purely financial investors. And so the interest in ESG and sustainability is increasing. We saw it in Europe a decade ago, and you're starting to see more and more, and it will grow I think unseen levels in North America. What that means for women in the space, I think, is a huge opportunity to marry what a lot of women are actually very good at in balancing the quantitative and the qualitative skills that are required in finance and across ESG and client management and all of these other functions. I really think women do a great job of balancing those. And I think ESG roles present a wonderful opportunity to bring both of those skill sets to bear and be very successful at delivering results on both ends.
Thank you for that. Melanie, I think you had an interesting point about the future of the Chief Sustainability Officer.
I think it's great, exactly what Marcelia had mentioned, because you're seeing more and more women taking on leadership roles in ESG, which to me, if I take a little bit more a further outlook on that, what I get really excited about is increasingly, and we're already seeing studies about this, that the next climate officer or the next climate focused officer in companies or investment houses will be the CFO, and that the CFO needs to have sustainability and ESG issues front of mind, which, as Marcelia mentioned, as more and more women take the mantle of ESG positions, they then become the more likely candidate and frankly the better sought after candidate for those CFO roles and other C-suite positions, all with the macro perspective of, again, elevating women into senior executive positions throughout various parts of the private sector. And so I'm excited to see the mainstreaming of ESG, as Marcelia talked about. I think it's critical, it's important. And now we have the financial data to back up why we need to be thinking about this at front of mind. And that's going to lead to some incredible opportunities where the C-suite itself won't have no longer a carve out for an ESG specific role, but everybody in the C-suite should be thinking about this and incorporating that into their investment committee processes. And that also gets this other point about professional diversity. I think there's been a great discussion about variety of diversity initiatives, and professional diversity is also part of that. Looking at the various roles of different people sitting in that investment committee or sitting at that table is really key.
It's interesting. And Marcelia, I wonder just if you could talk a bit about your exposure to the media in the past, perhaps why you weren't as exposed to the media as perhaps you wanted to be or could be, and how that's changed now that you've gotten the media training and I think started more appearances.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'd say my experience with the media is zilch. And this is probably actually my very first real experience with media. I've spoken at conferences and panels, keynote speakers, but speaking to a live audience, as Melanie knows, is very different than speaking to an anchor or through a webinar. And so this is baby steps for me. I'd say in the past, probably as many people experience, not just women, but other, people that are not at the top of the house or in a C-suite position, people that want to, people that are in the C-suite, whether they're the CEO or the president, are the ones that are typically heard at a firm. And then I'd also say, relevant to my role, so often people want to hear from investors. I am not on the investment side. I don't propose that I am an investor at all, but I do have a perspective, one that I think is very important. I speak with the voice of the client, not only inside my firm, but outside my firm. And I think that voice is so incredibly important to have institutional investors heard and their perspectives portrayed across media and otherwise.
Melanie, to just talk a little bit about the importance of representation in new energy, given the dominance of male executives in the traditional energy space, and sort of how you see that impacting the industry going forward.
I think there's really a sweeping change happening. I mean, we're in a moment as a country and as a nation across the board of just taking a harder look at our staffing structures and how we think about diversity across the entire value chain of every company that we invest in, but also as every company we build for that matter as well. And even in politics as well, I think we're really I'm hopeful that 2020 and this year is a real moment where we're seeing a real change in how we approach hiring and how we approach certain decision making. So that's really exciting. I think the other piece, to pick up on Marcelia's point, is that you also are seeing this opportunity here to think about how policymakers and all the different perspectives that people bring to the table into the investing space. So whether you're an investor or you're not an investor, the really important opportunities to think about the role that policy and regulation plays in investment decisions, and thinking about and corporates are doing the same thing as well. So I think it's a real moment right now where we're going to see more and more diverse voices that bring different perspectives that frankly will hopefully strengthen investment decision making going forward and make them more resilient to various shocks that we're going to see going forward.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to just ask one last question, and then we will have to wrap it up. And I'll ask this to both of you. So there's been some talk that since we've seen the protests in the United States and a bigger and important focus on issues of inequality, that investors are looking more at the S than the E. And I think we sort of addressed this in the last panel, but I want to hear both of you talk about, are you seeing that shift away from E in terms of the ESG space? And if not, how are you seeing investors looking at the full picture at this point? Marcelia, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So my view may be a bit myopic, just given that I'm in such a carbon intense business, and E is certainly one of the focal points of everything that we do. But certainly within the broader investment space, I do think you're starting to see more interest in the S and the G, if not for the communities that you're investing in or around or you're engaging with, particularly with portfolio companies, but also within diversity and inclusion at your own company or within portfolio companies. I think the S and the G can be and should be incorporated into the dialogue, even in an energy firm. I think they're incredibly important, and we will begin to see more and more of this. The ILPA, the International Limited Partner Association, certainly has begun to focus more on the S and the G through their questionnaires that are standard practice across the private equity and private investment space. And as more investors begin to adopt those ILPA questionnaires and send them and push for information and transparency at investment managers and GPs, I think you'll begin to see the underpinnings of more focus on the S and the G going forward across all investor types.
And from the Princeville perspective, we're actually seeing, I think similarly to Marcelia, which is in her energy firm, as a climate tech focused firm, we're actually seeing incredible focus and continued focus on the climate and the E part. But there's actually a nice, I would say, bleeding of all three of those silos, or rather a breakdown of the walls across the ES and G silos, where you're taking a topic like climate change and showcasing it from not only an environmental perspective, but the social impacts that come from investing in climate technologies, as well as the governance opportunities for investing in those climate technologies. And so we're, already to date, you've got this large corporate demand for companies and businesses for them to acquire, to invest in, to merge with, that are delivering these climate solutions. And our pipeline of opportunities of more and more companies being built that cut across ESG, all with the goal of solving the global climate challenge, that only is increasing. I think our pipeline continues to grow each year. It's almost doubling in size of the types of companies that are being built to solve for this challenge and to merge into this market. And so I think the policy signals are right, which is there's a vast open ocean for investors and companies to fill it with really exciting climate solutions and technology-enabled businesses. And I think firms like Marcelia and ours are standing ready to take advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you both so much. I really look forward to seeing more of both of you on our airways and others going forward. And I just want to say to everyone that if you go to www.bloomberg.com/New Voices, you'll find an application for the New Voices program, and we'll be taking nominations for the New Green Voices through August 10th.